Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight you'll hear 8 true accounts from those who wandered too far, looked too long, or listened when they shouldn't have. From forgotten trails in the mountains, to voices at the window, from glowing lights that lure you into the trees, to dripping footsteps that echo long after midnight. These are stories that don't just chill your spine. They stay with you. Some saw things no one else could explain. Others never came back quite the same. Each tale will lead you deeper until you're not sure what's fiction and what followed you home. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Giants on Juniper Hill. It was the summer of 1992 when I spent a few weeks at my uncle's house in the northern hills of Navarra, Spain. His property sat near the edge of Juniper Hill, a steep incline covered in wild shrubs, forgotten stone ruins, and crooked apple trees that hadn't borne fruit in decades. The town itself was barely more than a church, a cafe, and a handful of farmhouses with cracked terracotta roofs. I had just turned 19 and was visiting from Madrid, hoping to clear my head after a rough year in school. My cousin Mateo was 2 years older than me and knew every hidden path and abandoned structure in those hills. That particular weekend, his parents had gone south for a wedding, leaving us the house. Naturally, Mateo invited a few friends over for music and drinks. I wasn't much of a partier, so I stayed mostly sober, sitting near the back patio steps where the overgrown trail began. The air that night was still. And something about the silence past the hill's crest made me feel uneasy, like the land was holding its breath. As the night deepened and the others laughed inside over loud music and cheap wine, I stayed on the patio, watching the outline of Juniper Hill fade into the dark. The moonlight was just enough to sketch the top of the ridge in silver, but the rest of the landscape had sunk into a kind of charcoal void. That was when I noticed movement. At first, I thought it was just the breeze playing tricks with the long grass near the crest. But there was no wind. Everything around me was still. Then I saw them shapes not clear at first, but tall and slow, shifting at the very top of the hill. I squinted, unsure if I was seeing trees swaying or people walking. But these were not ordinary people. The figures seemed massive, far too tall, moving in a strangely synchronized line. I leaned forward, straining to make sense of what I was seeing. My breath caught in my throat when I realized that even from a distance, they were towering above the apple trees. I stood up slowly, eyes locked on the ridge, every part of me alert now. Something was definitely up there, and it was coming down. I wanted to call out to Mateo to ask if he was seeing the same thing, but my voice felt stuck somewhere between my chest and throat. The figures had crossed the crest and were beginning their slow descent down Juniper Hill. They didn't move like hikers or locals. Their steps were too smooth, too deliberate, and eerily in sync. There were 4 of them, evenly spaced, each casting long, warped shadows that dragged behind them like tattered cloaks. One appeared to be in front, broader than the others, with something like a wide-brimmed hat or hood covering its head. The others followed behind, heads tilted slightly downward, as if they were studying the earth or searching for something. I backed up slowly until my heels hit the edge of the patio, but then turned and slipped inside the house. Mateo was in the kitchen pouring another drink, and I grabbed his arm, whispering that something was outside up on the hill. He laughed, thinking I was messing with him, until he stepped out onto the patio with me. His face changed. He saw them too. He didn't speak, just stared, eyes narrowing. Then he said something that sent a cold wave through my body. I've seen them before. They never come this far down. We both stood frozen, watching as the giants moved closer, their shapes more defined now, impossibly tall, silent, and walking straight toward us. Mateo and I didn't move. We just stood there half hidden behind the stone column of the patio, staring at the four giants descending Juniper Hill. From our position, we could now see more detail. The leader walked with his shoulders squared, arms swaying at his sides in a slow, heavy rhythm. The wide-brimmed hat, or whatever it was, obscured most of his face. But the silhouette was unmistakable. This wasn't just a tall man. It was something else entirely. The others behind him were nearly identical in form, though slightly shorter. All four moved without sound, their footsteps completely absorbed by the dry grass and earth. No crunch, no rustle, just absolute silence. My skin prickled as I noticed how the light from the house seemed to bend around them. It was subtle but real, like the air near them shimmered unnaturally, as if heat waves followed their steps. Mateo whispered that they were no longer heading toward the road. They were now veering ever so slightly toward the house. That's when we finally snapped out of our daze. He grabbed my arm and pulled me back inside, slamming the glass door and locking it, though we both knew a lock would do nothing. We killed the lights and ducked down behind the kitchen counter. The whole house fell into a dim silence, interrupted only by the rhythmic thump of my heart in my ears. Mateo crawled toward the hallway window and peeked through the curtains. Then he turned to me and whispered, trembling, "They're here," right at the edge of the patio. He gestured for me to look. I didn't want to, but I had to. Slowly, I inched forward, lifted the curtain a sliver, and saw the shadow of a hand resting on the outer glass. Long fingers splayed unnaturally wide, as if searching for a way in. We didn't wait to see what came next. The moment I saw that enormous hand press against the glass, I dropped the curtain and whispered to Mateo, "We have to get out of here." He nodded without a word. We crawled across the living room floor, careful not to make a sound, and slipped into the back hallway that led to the cellar door. It was our only option. Mateo knew there was a storm hatch that led outside from the cellar, one we could use if we stayed low and moved fast. As we opened the cellar door, the hinges gave a soft creak, and we both froze. No movement from outside. We slipped down the wooden stairs and quietly closed the door above us, plunging into near darkness. The air was damp, filled with the scent of old wood and earth. Mateo found the hatch, but it was stuck. He threw his shoulder into it once, twice, and finally it gave way with a muffled groan. We emerged into the brush behind the house and immediately crouched low. The sky was clouded, but we could still see the silhouettes of the figures on the patio. They weren't trying to enter the house anymore. They just stood there, motionless, facing the door, as if waiting. We didn't stop to wonder. We ran, cutting through the orchard, not daring to look back, hearts pounding in rhythm with our footsteps. Whatever they were, they had come to be seen, and they knew we saw them. We never spoke of that night again, at least not to anyone outside of ourselves. Mateo and I told his parents the power had flickered, and we had spooked ourselves after watching a horror movie. They didn't question it, but for weeks after, I couldn't sleep without checking every window, every corner of the yard. The figures never returned, or so I thought. 2 decades later, after Mateo had moved to Pamplona and I was living back in Madrid with my own family, I received a package. No note, just an envelope with a photograph inside. It was a crayon drawing, shaky and childlike. At first, I was confused until I flipped it over and saw my son's name written in the corner in his blocky 6-year-old handwriting. 4 tall black shapes on a hill, one with a wide hat, 3 behind it. My breath caught. I called my wife and asked when he had drawn it. She said just the day before. She found him sleepwalking toward the balcony window, whispering, "They're outside." I asked her what time. She checked. 2:15 in the morning, same as that night on Juniper Hill. I asked my son why he drew them. He shrugged. "I just saw them in my head," he said. "I didn't know what else to do." Now every time I close my eyes, I wonder if they ever really left or if they've just been waiting for someone else to see. Even now, all these years later, I still hesitate when I walk past glass at night. I find myself glancing into the shadows, waiting for movement, for an outline, for the quiet weight of something watching. I've tried to convince myself that what Mateo and I saw was just a trick of the dark, some illusion born of fatigue and imagination. But I can't. Not when my son, with no knowledge of that night, drew the exact same 4 shapes. Not when he sleepwalked to the window at the same hour I once saw them descend. Maybe some things imprint themselves on a place. Maybe they're bound to certain hills, certain bloodlines, or certain eyes that are willing or cursed to see. I don't know why they came. I don't know what they wanted. But I know this much: if they ever return, I'll recognize them. And this time, I won't just run. I'll be ready. Story 2. The Howl by the Reservoir. 3 summers ago, my wife and I took a short trip to a quiet reservoir in southern Chile to celebrate her birthday. We had both grown tired of city life and wanted nothing more than a weekend of silence, water, and sky. The spot we chose was a secluded area near Lago Colico, surrounded by dense forest and rarely visited by tourists. We arrived early on a Friday morning, set up our small canvas tent by the water's edge, and spent the first day swimming and grilling fish we caught ourselves. It felt like we had the entire lake to ourselves. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the tree line, we sat by the fire wrapped in blankets, sharing wine and stories. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said she hadn't felt this calm in years. I remember smiling and watching the final streaks of orange vanish from the sky. But deep down, I felt something strange, an odd tightness in my chest, like the forest was waiting. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just the change in altitude. I didn't know then that silence can be a warning. That night, just before dawn, something woke us both. It wasn't a sound exactly, but a shift in the air, like the sudden pressure drop before a storm. My wife sat up first, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. I heard her whisper my name, voice tight, uncertain. Then came the noise. A low, distant howl echoed across the reservoir. It wasn't the cry of a coyote or the sharp bark of a fox. It was deeper, longer, like something old calling out from the far side of the forest. I sat up listening, trying to place it. My wife turned to me with wide eyes and said, "Please don't go out there tonight. Promise me." I laughed gently to calm her and told her it was probably a dog or some animal from a nearby farm. But even as I spoke, something about the way the howl had cut through the trees stuck with me. It wasn't the sound itself, it was the silence that followed. No insects, no wind, just a stillness that felt too deliberate, too exact. Like the forest was holding its breath. Later that afternoon, after trying to laugh off the morning unease, we returned to our usual routine. We hiked a short trail that wrapped around the lake, stopping at different points to take photos and skip stones across the water. The sun was out again, the breeze warm, and the forest felt almost normal. But every so often, I would glance toward the tree line and feel that strange tightness return, as if something was watching us from behind the brush. My wife noticed it too. She kept looking over her shoulder and gripping my hand a little tighter than usual. That night, just after sunset, I told her I'd planned to do some night fishing. I had seen a few large fish breaking the surface earlier and didn't want to miss the chance. Her face dropped with the moment I said it. "Please don't go," she whispered. "I have a bad feeling about tonight." I tried to reassure her, told her I'd take the flashlight and bring the pistol. But her fear didn't fade. "What if that howl wasn't just an animal? What if it's waiting for you?" she asked. I smiled and kissed her forehead, told her she was being dramatic. Still a part of me hesitated, but I went anyway. Something about the lake after dark felt magnetic, like it was calling me. I should have listened to her. I made my way along the narrow trail that curved around the lake, the flashlight swinging gently in my left hand, the pistol holstered on my right hip. The moon hung low and full, casting a silver reflection across the still water. Everything felt unnaturally quiet. No frogs, no crickets, not even the usual rustle of wind through the leaves, just the sound of my own footsteps and the steady rhythm of my breath. I reached a small rocky outcrop that jutted into the water, my chosen fishing spot. I set down my gear, cast my line, and waited. 20 minutes passed. I caught nothing. Just as I was about to reel in and try another spot, I heard a sound behind me. Not a twig snap or rustle. A breath. Slow, ragged breathing no more than 20 or 30 feet away. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I turned and raised the flashlight. That was when I saw them, eyes low and yellow, glowing from the shadow between two tree trunks. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just stared. I reached for my pistol and drew it with shaking hands. I shouted, warning whatever it was to leave. No reaction. I aimed, finger trembling on the trigger, and squeezed. Click. Nothing. The gun was empty. I had forgotten to load it in my rush. My blood ran cold, and in that instant, the eyes rose. Not forward, up. Whatever it was had been crouching. I began to step forward, impossibly tall and fast. I dropped the flashlight and ran. I didn't care about my gear or the trail. I just ran. And behind me, I heard the same howl as before, but this time it was closer, much closer. I crashed through the underbrush branches, slapping my face and arms, heart pounding so hard, I thought it would tear through my chest. Behind me, the sound of heavy footsteps followed steady, deliberate gaining ground. I didn't dare look back. I knew if I did, I'd freeze. The trail curved sharply toward the dam that cut across the narrow end of the reservoir. It was fenced in with rusted railings and barely wide enough for one person to walk across, but it was my only hope. I sprinted for it, lungs burning, legs on fire, ears filled with the sound of something breathing just behind me. As I reached the dam, I stumbled but caught myself and leapt forward onto the concrete. I turned just once to see what was chasing me. And there it was, standing at the edge of the tree line. 7 feet tall, covered in matted fur with long arms that hung past its knees, and those same burning yellow eyes. Its face was something between a dog and a man twisted with rage. It let out a growl that vibrated in my bones, then vanished back into the forest. I stood on the dam for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to blink. When I finally returned to camp at sunrise, my wife was waiting pale and shaking. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew, and I never went fishing after dark again. Weeks passed, and though I tried to put the encounter behind me, it stayed with me in flashes, those yellow eyes, the empty click of the pistol, the snarl that shook the trees. I told no one, not even my wife. I convinced myself it was some wild animal, a nightmare, amplified by isolation and fear. But the truth came back to me one quiet morning when my wife called me into our son's room. He had woken up crying from a dream, something he rarely did. I knelt beside him and asked what was wrong. He said he saw a tall thing with dog eyes standing at the end of our hallway. I felt my breath stop. I asked what it looked like. He said it was big with long arms and a face like a wolf, and it made a sound like someone screaming underwater. I stared at him, too stunned to speak. He then added very quietly, "I think it knows you." That single sentence undid me. I hadn't told anyone, not even in passing. Whatever I saw at the reservoir hadn't stayed in the forest. Somehow, it followed me back. Or maybe it had always been following me. And now it wasn't just watching me. It was watching my family. Since that day, I've kept the pistol loaded. I check the locks twice before bed, and I wake at the slightest noise. But deep down, I know none of that will matter. What I saw by the reservoir wasn't just some animal passing through. It was aware, deliberate, and worst of all, connected to me in ways I still don't understand. I think about the howl often, about how it cut through the night like it was calling not randomly, but to someone. To me. Maybe it marked me. Maybe it waited. All I know is this: the silence before that howl wasn't just emptiness. It was a warning. And now every time the wind dies, or the house creaks too long, I wonder if it's come back. Not for me this time, but for who comes next. Story 3. The Imitator in the Orange Grove. When I was 17, I spent the summer with my grandfather in a rural village outside Valencia, Spain. His house sat on the edge of an old orange grove that had been abandoned for years. The trees were overgrown, their branches tangled like arms, reaching for something they had long forgotten. Most days I helped him tend to the garden or repair the cracked stone walls around the property. But the grove always caught my eye. There was something strange about it. Birds never nested in those trees, and the air between the rows always felt colder than the rest of the land. One evening just after sunset, I was sitting on the back steps with my younger cousin Lucia. We were sharing a bag of sunflower seeds and listening to the cicadas when we heard it. A soft meow coming from the trees. The odd thing was the family cat Nico was already curled up on the porch beside us. Lucia looked at me confused. Then the sound came again. The same pitch, same rhythm. Exactly the same. It wasn't an echo. It was a copy. And it was coming closer. At first, we thought it might be another cat, maybe a stray wandering through the grove. But the sound didn't move like an animal would. It didn't weave through the underbrush or rustle any leaves. It just repeated same tone, same length, like someone hitting play on a recording. Nico lifted his head, but didn't move, which was strange. He was usually territorial quick to hiss at anything unfamiliar. Lucia whispered, "Maybe it's a fox," but her voice was shaky. I stood up and took a few steps toward the grove, squinting between the trunks as the light faded. The meowing stopped. Then from the opposite side of the grove, it came again, same sound, same pitch. But we hadn't seen or heard anything move. It was as if the voice had jumped from one place to another in an instant. That was when I felt it. Not fear exactly, but something worse. A slow, creeping awareness that we weren't alone. That whatever was out there wasn't trying to hide. It was letting us know it could sound like something we trusted. And it wanted us to come closer. Lucia grabbed my arm and told me not to go any further, but I was already stepping into the grove, flashlight in hand. The trees arched overhead, their limbs thick with tangled leaves, casting long shadows across the dry soil. I swept the light side to side, but there was nothing. No movement, no ice shine, no sound at all. until the meowing started again. This time it was right beside me. I spun the light to the left, expecting to catch a glimpse of fur, but there was nothing. Then it came again from behind me now. I turned, but the grove was empty. My skin prickled. Something was wrong. Not just strange, but wrong in a way that felt ancient. I called out to Lucia to go back inside, and she hesitated before running for the house. The moment she disappeared, the air around me changed, heavy, still. Then I heard my own voice. It was soft, hesitant, like a question spoken from deep inside the grove. It repeated a phrase I had said just moments earlier. Lucia, stay close. But I hadn't said it like that. The cadence was off, like someone repeating a sentence they didn't fully understand. I backed away, heart-pounding eyes darting between the trees. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to scare me. It was learning, studying. And it had started with our cat's voice. But now it was moving on to mine. I took one step back, then another, careful not to trip over the roots snaking across the ground. The flashlight shook in my hand as I aimed it toward the space where the voice had come from. Nothing moved, but I could feel something watching me just beyond the edge of the light. The silence pressed in tight, broken only by the sudden crunch of dry leaves behind me. I spun around, breath caught in my throat, and saw a shadow duck behind a tree. It moved like a person, quick and upright, but too smooth, too quiet. I called out, unsure if I wanted a response, but what came back was my own voice again. A perfect echo. Same tone, same inflection. Then it said something I had never said. I see you. My blood ran cold. I turned and ran, crashing through the grove branches, whipping my face and arms. I reached the edge of the trees, just as the last light from the house flickered into view. Lucia was at the door yelling my name. I looked back only once. A figure stood at the edge of the trees. It was tall, thin, and still. I couldn't make out its face, but I could see its mouth move. Even from a distance, I heard it. Lucia, stay close. That same hollow voice, stretched and wrong. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, though I didn't know if locks meant anything to something like that. My grandfather looked at me without saying a word. He just nodded once, as if he'd been expecting this moment. That was the last night I ever stepped into the grove. That night, I barely slept. I sat in the kitchen with the lights on a kitchen knife clutched in my lap, listening for any sound from the grove. My grandfather eventually joined me, carrying 2 cups of strong black coffee. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer explanations. He simply said, "You heard it, didn't you?" I nodded. He told me it had happened before years ago to his older brother. Same voice mimicry, same place. Back then, no one believed the stories. They said the heat warped minds, that loneliness made people hear things. But his brother had left one day, walked into the grove just after dawn, and never came back. They found his shoes by the oldest tree, but nothing else. My grandfather never stepped foot in there again. The town called it cursed, a place the land never wanted touched. I stayed inside the rest of the summer, never looking directly at the grove through the window. But sometimes, just before sunset, I'd hear a soft sound from the edge of the trees. Not a meow, not my voice. Lucia's, always the same. A gentle call, quiet and steady. Come outside, please. And each time, Nico the cat would lift his head and growl low under his breath. He remembered it too. It wasn't until years later that I learned the truth, or at least something closer to it. I was back in Valencia for a short visit and decided to stop by the local museum where they were showcasing regional folklore and oral histories. In one dimly lit corner, I found a display titled Los Ecos de la Huerta, or The Echoes of the Grove. It featured yellowed pages from a farmer's journal dated 1876. The man described a string of disappearances around an orchard once planted on sacred ground. He wrote about voices calling out from the trees, always familiar, always, just wrong enough to make your spine crawl. He claimed it was a spirit that didn't hunt like a beast, but learned like a man. It would mimic the voices of those you loved until you answered, until you stepped into its home. My skin went cold as I read. One passage in particular burned into my memory. He wrote, "If it calls you by your own voice, it means you've been chosen, and it will never stop calling." I thought of the figure that stood in the grove, its mouth shaping my words, and how Lucia still sometimes hears her name outside her bedroom window even now. We weren't scared of a ghost. We were being studied, and it's still learning. To this day, I don't walk near orange trees after sunset. Even the scent of their blossoms makes something tighten in my chest. I've tried to tell myself it was just imagination, a strange memory shaped by fear and years of silence. But then I'll get a call from Lucia, asking if I've heard it again. The voice, always familiar, always just outside. Sometimes it's her, sometimes it's me. We've learned not to answer, not to follow. But I wonder how many others heard that voice and didn't know to run. How many stepped into the grove thinking it was someone they trusted. I used to think it was a haunting. Now I think it's something older. Something that doesn't want to hurt us, just understand what we are by wearing our voices like masks. And the worst part is knowing it's still out there. Listening, practicing, waiting for someone else to mistake the echo for something real. Story 4, The House with Two Closets. When I was 10 years old, my family spent a winter in a rented farmhouse deep in the Manitoba countryside. My father had taken a short-term contract restoring antique furniture, and the farmhouse was the closest place we could afford near the workshop. From the outside, the house looked like something out of an old movie, peeling white paint shuttered windows and a wraparound porch that creaked even when no one walked on it. Inside, it was even stranger. The layout was uneven with narrow staircases, oddly shaped rooms, and an unfinished basement that always smelled like wet stone. My bedroom was upstairs at the end of the hall. It had two narrow walk-in closets that ran the full length of the room on opposite walls. I remember thinking that was unusual, but I was young and curious, and the closets became part of my nightly routine. I'd open both doors before bed just to make sure they were empty. For the first week, everything was fine, quiet, still. But around the 8th night, something began to change. Something inside that room stopped feeling empty. It started subtly, the kind of thing a kid might shrug off. One night as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard a faint knock. Not loud, not urgent, just two soft taps, as if someone gently rapped their knuckles against wood. I sat up, blinking in the darkness, and looked toward the closet to my left. Nothing. I turned to the right. Still nothing. I told myself it was the house settling the way adults always explain away strange sounds. But the next night it happened again. 2 knocks, this time one from each closet. Left, then right. Perfectly timed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The air in the room felt heavier, like it had thickened in my lungs. I pulled the covers over my head and lay still for hours, too afraid to call for my parents. In the morning, everything was normal. Sunlight poured through the window. The doors stood wide open just as I had left them. But I knew what I had heard. And deep down, I knew it wasn't the house settling. Something else was moving in those walls. And it knew I was listening. The knocking became a nightly ritual, always at the same hour, always the same rhythm. Left closet, then right. And sometimes, just when I thought it was over, I would hear a faint whisper drift from somewhere inside the walls. I couldn't make out words, just the low hum of something trying to speak without using a voice. I begged my parents to switch rooms, but they told me I was letting the old house get to my imagination. One night, desperate for answers, I left both closet doors closed before going to bed. I watched them in the dark until my eyes burned. Just past midnight, the knocking came again. But this time it was louder, and it didn't stop at 2 knocks. It came again and again, alternating from one closet to the other, like something pacing between them just behind the drywall. Then suddenly both doors creaked open at the same time, slowly, as if inviting me in. I couldn't scream. My throat locked. I stared into the dark, empty spaces where my clothes should have been, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shape. Not fully formed, just a faint outline. Tall, thin, pressed against the far back wall. And then it vanished like smoke. I didn't sleep that night. And from then on, I knew that whatever lived in that room wasn't just knocking to be heard. It was waiting to be let in. I stopped opening the closet doors after that night. I even pushed a chair against one and stacked books in front of the other, hoping it would be enough to keep whatever was behind them from getting out. But the knocking never stopped. It only changed. It grew softer, slower, like it was waiting for me to react. Some nights, I'd wake to hear the faintest scratch coming from inside the right closet. Other nights, I'd feel a breeze on my face, cold and steady, even though the windows were shut tight. I stopped telling my parents. I could see in their faces they thought I was just dreaming or acting out for attention. Then one night, it finally revealed itself. I had fallen asleep early, utterly exhausted, and woke in the middle of the night with a sharp, cold pressure against my back. At first, I thought it was the wall. But when I reached behind me, my hand didn't touch wood or plaster. It touched skin, cold, dry, and still. I froze. I turned slowly and saw it something tall crouched beside my bed, its face inches from mine, gaunt and pale with eyes too wide and too black. It didn't speak. It only breathed shallow and raspy, like it had been holding its breath for years. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life, and my father came running in seconds. But by the time he turned on the light, the thing was gone. Both closet doors were open again. My father blamed a nightmare. I knew better. The house wasn't just haunted. It was watching. And it had finally stepped out from the walls. After that night, I refused to sleep in the upstairs room. I begged my parents until they let me move to the downstairs couch, where I could at least see every corner of the room and keep a lamp on without question. They were concerned, but still convinced I was having intense night terrors brought on by the cold, the isolation, or maybe too many ghost stories. I kept the truth to myself. I didn't care if they believed me anymore. I just needed distance from that room, from the closets. My father went upstairs the next morning and found the furniture I had stacked still in place, untouched. But both closet doors were wide open again. No explanation, no footprints, no draft. He shut them and said nothing. A week later, we left the farmhouse. My father's project ended earlier than expected, and we returned to the city. I was relieved that something had shifted in me. I became more withdrawn, less trusting of shadows, more cautious around silence. Years later, out of curiosity, I searched online to see if anyone else had ever rented that farmhouse. To my surprise, I found an old blog post from a woman who had stayed there with her children. She mentioned the room with 2 closets, said her son had complained about knocking at night, said he stopped speaking after they left. That was the moment I knew I hadn't imagined any of it. The house remembers, and it waits for the next child to listen. A few months ago, long after I had stopped thinking about that house regularly, I came across something that brought it all back. I was scrolling through a paranormal discussion forum late at night, mostly out of boredom, when I stumbled upon a post titled, "Two Closets, One Room." The user described staying in a rented farmhouse in Manitoba during the winter, sometime in the early 2000s. They wrote about the strange layout of the narrow staircases, the way the closets faced each other like mirrors, waiting to trap something in between. As I read further, my chest tightened. They described the knocking first on one door, then the other. The cold breath, the sensation of being watched while lying in bed. But what truly unsettled me was the final part of the post. The user said they had taken a photo in the room on their last night, just for memories. In the photo, they claimed a faint figure could be seen standing between the two closets, half in shadow, barely visible. They uploaded the image. I clicked it already knowing what I would see. And there it was. Same height, same posture, same shape I had seen crouched beside my bed all those years ago. It hadn't just haunted me. It had stayed. Or worse, it had never been alone. Maybe it was still there waiting for someone else to come through the door and leave both closets open. Sometimes, I still dream of that room. Not as it was, but as it might be now, dustier, quieter, untouched. I see the two closet doors wide open, the floor bare, and that space in between where something once stood. I wonder how many others have walked into that room, laughed at its strange design, and gone to sleep without knowing what waits in the dark. I don't think it wants to hurt people. I think it just wants to be noticed, to be remembered. And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. That something can exist in silence, hidden behind old walls, patiently waiting for the right voice, the right fear to bring it back to life. And once you see it, really see it, you never forget it. I didn't. Never will. Story 5. The Voice at the Cabin Window. In the winter of 1998, I took a solo trip to a remote hunting cabin in southern Alaska. I had just turned 30, recently divorced, and needed time to clear my head. A friend of mine who worked with forestry services gave me access to a small wooden cabin near the base of Mount Edgecombe. It had no electricity, no running water, just a wood stove, a cot, and a view of the endless forest. It was perfect. I had spent weeks planning the trip. My pack held only what I needed: dried food, a rifle, a camera, and a journal. The hike in took nearly a full day, and by the time I arrived, the light was already slipping behind the pines. That first night was quiet. The air so cold it crackled in my lungs, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. I remember sitting by the stove, watching the fire dance, feeling more at peace than I had in years. I didn't know that something had already noticed me, something that lived in the woods just beyond the reach of firelight, something that had been waiting for someone to come alone. The next morning, everything felt normal. I chopped wood, explored a frozen stream nearby, and spent the afternoon sketching in my journal while the snow fell softly outside. But that night, just as I was settling into my sleeping bag, I heard something. At first it was faint, just a light rustling outside the cabin, like branches brushing against the siding. I figured it was wind, or maybe a curious animal. I tried to ignore it, pulling the blanket over my shoulders. Then came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. Not urgent, not frantic, just steady. I sat up, heart suddenly pounding. No one knew I was here. I hadn't passed a single soul on the trail in. I waited, frozen, listening. After a long silence, I forced myself to check. I crept toward the door, rifle in hand, and opened it just enough to see out. Nothing. Just snow and trees. I shut it again, locked it, and returned to my sleeping bag. I told myself it was my imagination, a creaky log or shifting ice. But in my gut, I knew something had come to my door. Something that knew I was alone. The following night, I tried to convince myself the knock had been a fluke, some natural noise amplified by the silence and my isolation. I kept the fire burning longer this time, comforted by the glow and the crackling wood. But around midnight, I heard the sound again this time, not at the door, but at the window. A soft scraping like fingernails dragging across the glass. The window was too high off the ground for an animal to reach, and the snow beneath it was undisturbed. I didn't move. I just lay there breathing shallowly, eyes fixed on the wall opposite the window, refusing to look. Then a voice, my voice, from outside. Let me in. It wasn't a recording or an echo. It was identical to how I speak. Same tone, same inflection, only colder, flatter. It repeated the words again slowly. Let me in. I sat up, heart racing, and reached for the rifle. The voice continued unchanging, emotionless. Just the same words over and over. I crept to the window and pulled back the curtain an inch. There was no one there. Only the dark forest and my reflection in the glass. But the voice kept coming. And that was when I understood. It wasn't just repeating my voice. It was wearing it, testing it, like it was learning how to be me. I backed away from the window, keeping my eyes on the reflection, afraid that if I blinked, something would appear behind the glass. The voice fell silent for a moment, as if it knew I was listening more carefully now. Then came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. Not crunching like boots over snow, but soft, almost padded like bare feet, pressing into the icy crust. I stood frozen in the center of the room, clutching the rifle with both hands, trying to steady my breath. Whatever it wasn't trying to break in. It was waiting, watching, testing the boundaries. I heard it stop just outside the back wall where the window above the cot sat eye level with the forest slope. Then the voice returned, but not mine this time. My father's, or something like it. The words were soft, almost coaxing. Come outside, son. Just want to talk. I hadn't heard that voice in years. He died when I was in college. I knew it wasn't him. But something about hearing it again, perfect and precise, made my legs tremble. I shouted through the door, warned it to leave, fired around into the air. The sound echoed through the trees. For a few moments, nothing moved. Then I heard something climb onto the roof. Slow, heavy steps pacing back and forth above me. The cabin creaked with every step. I aimed the rifle at the ceiling, heart hammering in my ears. Then from above, the voice spoke again. This time it was both my voice and my father's layered into one. Let me in. Let us in. The weight of that final word was unbearable. Us. Whatever was outside, it wasn't alone. And it knew exactly how to get inside by sounding like home. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on the floor with my back to the stove rifle across my knees, staring at the door while the thing paced above me. Every few minutes, it would stop as if listening. Then the voice would return softer now, almost gentle. Let me in. Just talk to me. Sometimes it used my voice. Sometimes my father's. Once it spoke like my ex-wife. Each time it was perfect, too perfect. Like a machine learning how to wear a soul. I stayed like that until the first light of dawn bled into the sky. The footsteps finally stopped, followed by a silence so complete it rang in my ears. I waited another hour, then cautiously stepped outside. The snow around the cabin was untouched, no tracks, No broken branches, nothing. I packed up my gear without breakfast, left the fire burning, and hiked back to the trailhead without looking back. The entire walk I felt eyes on me just beyond the trees, but nothing followed. When I reached the road, I called my friend and told him the cabin was unsafe. He didn't ask why. He just said, "I understand. You're not the first," and hung up. Since then, I haven't gone into the woods alone, and I never will. Because I know now somewhere out there something still carries my voice, and it's still waiting for someone to answer. Several months after that night at the cabin, I tried to forget. I buried the memory under work noise and daylight. But one evening, while reorganizing old files on my laptop, I came across the audio journal I had recorded during the trip. I hesitated, then clicked play. The first few entries were uneventful. Me describing the hike, the snow, the cabin layout. Then came the final night's recording. I must have left the recorder on by accident. For nearly 30 minutes, there was nothing but the low crackle of the fire and occasional shifting of wood. But then faintly, I heard it. My voice, repeating the same phrase. "Let me in." Then another voice layered over it, my father's. The two voices blurred together, overlapping in ways I hadn't fully remembered. Then a third voice joined them, one I didn't recognize at all. A woman, calm, slow, and chillingly familiar. She said only 3 words, "You're already inside." The file ended abruptly. I sat there stunned, replaying it again and again. I had never spoken those words. No one else had been with me. And yet her voice sounded like someone I should know. That was the moment I realized the truth. It hadn't been trying to get in. It was trying to convince me I had never left. That part of me, some small forgotten piece, was still there, still listening. Even now, years later, I still wonder if that thing truly stayed behind, or if it followed me in some quiet way I haven't yet noticed. Sometimes, when I'm alone at home late at night, I'll catch a faint whisper outside my window. Not loud, not clear, but enough to make me freeze. Enough to make me remember. I've stopped trying to explain what happened. Most people wouldn't believe it, and honestly, part of me hopes they never have to. But if you ever find yourself deep in the woods alone, and you hear your own voice calling from the dark, don't answer. Don't look, don't speak. Because once it knows you've heard it, it never forgets. And once it sounds like you, it knows exactly how to find its way back. Story 6. The Eyes by the Old Canal. Last autumn, I visited a small town in Belgium where my great-uncle had lived his entire life. He had passed away earlier that year, and I had been asked to help clear out his cottage, a quiet brick house nestled near an old canal that once served as a trade route centuries ago. The place was peaceful, surrounded by woods fog in the mornings and the smell of damp earth in the air. Each evening I would walk the narrow path along the canal to clear my head. The path curved gently beside the water and passed near the crumbling remains of a stone bridge that hadn't been used in decades. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you were walking through a painting. Locals rarely used the path at night, though no one gave a reason. They just smiled and said it was better to stick to the main road after sunset. I didn't think much of it. I liked the quiet. I liked the way the trees seemed to close in and hush the world around me. That was before I saw the eyes. It was the third night when I first felt something was off. I had taken my usual walk just after dinner, the sky still holding on to the last hints of daylight. The air was cool, the leaves crunching softly underfoot. As I neared the old stone bridge, I noticed that the usual sounds of the woods had faded. No wind, no birds, Not even the distant splash of water against the canal wall. Just silence. I paused near the bend in the trail where the trees grew thickest and reached for my phone to check the time. But the screen was black. Dead. Strange, since I had charged it earlier. I shrugged it off and kept walking. Then I saw them. 2 small points of light ahead just beyond the curve of the path. At first I thought they were reflections, maybe from a bike, or a fox's eyes caught in the fading light. But they didn't flicker. They didn't move. They just hovered there low to the ground, and perfectly still. I stood frozen, unsure why my chest felt tight, or why I suddenly felt like I had stepped into a room where something was already waiting. I stood there for what felt like minutes, my eyes locked on those 2 glowing points. The longer I stared, the more I realized they weren't reflecting light. They were emitting it. A soft, steady glow, pale yellow and slightly pulsing like a breath. I took a cautious step forward, thinking maybe it was some kind of animal. But the eyes remained fixed, unmoving. That was what unsettled me the most. Every instinct told me that if it were alive, it would have shifted, blinked, reacted. But it didn't. It just watched. I tried calling out my voice low and unsure, more to hear something human in that silence than to get a reply. Nothing answered. The eyes didn't flinch. Then, as I turned to leave, I heard a splash. Not a soft ripple, but the heavy, wet sound of something large entering the water behind me. I spun around, scanning the canal's edge, but there was nothing. No ripples, no movement, only more silence. When I turned back toward the eyes, they were closer. Not by much, maybe a few feet, but definitely closer. I hadn't seen them move. I hadn't even blinked, but they were nearer now and higher off the ground. I felt my legs begin to shake. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just watching. It was approaching. Slowly, patiently, like it had all the time in the world. I stepped back slowly, my shoes crunching over the gravel, as I kept my eyes locked on those 2 glowing points. They hovered just above the path now, unmoving once again, as if waiting for me to react. My breath felt shallow, and every hair on my arms stood on end. I wanted to run, but something deeper than fear held me still. It was curiosity laced with dread, the kind that whispers, "What if?" in the back of your mind. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the tiny keychain flashlight I always carried. It wasn't strong, barely more than a glimmer, but I clicked it on and pointed it toward the eyes. What I saw made my knees nearly buckle. There was no body, no shape. Just the eyes suspended in the air above the ground, and behind them, a faint shimmer. Like the air itself had bent, or like something was wrapped in glass, almost invisible. Then the eyes blinked. Slowly. Once. Twice. I gasped and stumbled backward, and the shimmer moved. It stepped, no, glided forward. I could feel the pressure of its presence, like a weight, settling across my shoulder. The trees behind me creaked, as if the entire forest leaned in to listen. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the path, the rocks, or the branches slapping my face. I ran until the cottage lights came into view and slammed the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum. But the worst part wasn't what I had seen. It was what I hadn't. In that brief flash of light, I realized the eyes weren't watching me. They were looking past me toward the cottage, toward where I was now, toward something else I hadn't seen yet. I spent the rest of that night sitting on the living room floor with all the lights on. A fire roaring in the small stone hearth, and a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. Every creak of the old wooden beams made me flinch. I kept glancing toward the windows, half expecting to see those pale yellow eyes staring in from the dark. But nothing came. No footsteps, no voices. Just the slow ticking of the wall clock and the occasional gust of wind brushing past the shutters. When morning came, the relief was immediate and overwhelming. I packed my things in under 10 minutes, leaving behind half of what I had brought, and didn't even bother locking the door. As I drove away down the narrow road toward town, I made the mistake of looking in the rearview mirror. Just once. Standing at the edge of the trees near the canal path was a figure. It was hard to make out in the fog, but the eyes were unmistakable soft yellow and unblinking. It didn't move. It didn't follow. It just watched. I never returned to the cottage after that. And for months, I avoided mirrors and windows after dark. Not out of paranoia, but because I knew now that some things wait in silence. And if you notice them, truly notice them, they never stop watching. A few weeks after returning home, I received a small package in the mail from the local archives office in the Belgian town where my great-uncle had lived. Before leaving, I had asked if they had any historical records about the old canal or the property line around his cottage. Inside the envelope was a yellowed map and a folded letter written in neat cursive. The letter was dated 1911 and had belonged to a canal inspector who had surveyed the area after several complaints from locals about missing livestock and strange lights near the water. One sentence stood out underlined in red pencil: "The watchers near the bridge do not approach unless acknowledged." Below it, a hand-drawn sketch showed two glowing circles hovering over the path, almost identical to what I had seen. But what unsettled me more was the final paragraph, hastily scrawled in the inspector's own handwriting. It read, "I looked too long. The shape behind the light is not of this world. It knows now that I saw it, and it follows in reflections." My stomach turned cold. I hadn't just seen it. I had shined a light on it, faced it, given it recognition. And the moment I did, it saw me. Not just my face, but something deeper. Something it might still be studying. Not from the woods this time, but from every darkened surface that holds my image. Since then, I've avoided looking into mirrors at night. It sounds absurd, but sometimes I catch a flicker, just a flicker in the corner of my vision, like eyes staring back that shouldn't be there. I've covered the bathroom mirror. I turn off the screen of my phone when I pass a dark window. I live surrounded by light, not for comfort, but for protection. Because now I understand. It wasn't the eyes that were dangerous. It was the act of seeing them, of letting them know I could see what was never meant to be seen. That old inspector was right. Once they know you've looked, they don't need the woods to find you. Just a reflection, just a glance, and they're watching, always watching. Story 7. Dripping Footsteps. 3 years ago, during monsoon season, my mother and I traveled to visit my grandfather's old house deep in the Mekong Delta. He had passed away the year before, and the family wanted someone to check on the property during the flooding. The house sat on a raised wooden platform surrounded by rice paddies and narrow canals. It was simple, quiet, and worn down by time wooden shutters that no longer closed all the way, a metal roof patched with old tin sheets, and a musty scent of soil that never left the air. We arrived just before dusk, the sky gray and swollen with rain. My mother insisted we sleep in the main room and keep the mosquito nets tight. She lit incense for my grandfather and placed his old portrait on the small altar by the wall. That night, as I lay under the net, listening to the hum of frogs and distant thunder, I felt strangely at peace. The kind of peace that feels too quiet, like something holding its breath just beyond the walls. I didn't know it then, but something else was still living in that house. and it had waited a long time to be heard. It began sometime after midnight. I was half asleep when I heard the first sound, soft, wet footsteps moving slowly across the wooden floor outside our room. Not hurried, not heavy, just steady like someone pacing barefoot through a shallow puddle. I sat up listening. My mother was still asleep beside me, her breathing even. I stayed still under the mosquito net, unsure if I was dreaming. But the sound continued, step by step back and forth just outside our door. The floor creaked lightly beneath each movement, and with every step, there was that faint, unmistakable drip, like water falling from soaked clothes. My first thought was that maybe a villager had come through the rain for shelter, but no one ever came this deep without calling ahead. And we had locked the door. I whispered to my mother, but she didn't stir. I waited for the footsteps to stop, for the door to creak open, for something to change, but nothing did. The steps just kept going, always at the same pace, always that same dripping sound, like someone lost in a rhythm they couldn't escape, or didn't want to. I pulled the blanket up to my chest and stared at the wooden door, barely visible in the dim glow of the oil lamp. The footsteps hadn't stopped. If anything, they had grown slower, more deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was outside was growing more confident. The dripping was louder now too, like wet clothes clinging to skin with every step. I held my breath when I saw a shadow move across the narrow gap beneath the door. It paused right there on the other side. I thought I could hear breathing ragged and wet, like someone recovering from a long swim. Then came the soft squelch of water under bare soles. I whispered again to my mother, a little louder this time, but she didn't move. That's when I noticed something far more disturbing. Her blanket had a growing dark patch beneath it, and it was damp. I reached over to shake her, panicked, but her body was cold. Not lifeless, just distant, like she was trapped in a dream too deep to wake from. My hand was shaking. I turned my head slowly toward the door, just as another drip landed on the floorboards beside my cot. I looked up. The ceiling above me was dry. No leaks, no holes. Just another wet footprint inches from my mattress. Whatever it was already inside. And it wasn't walking anymore. It was waiting. I froze, staring at the wet footprint beside my bed, unable to breathe. The air in the room had shifted. It was thick, humid, almost soupy with heat, yet I felt ice settling into my spine. The mosquito net rippled slightly, though there was no breeze. I leaned slowly to one side, careful not to make a sound, and grabbed the small flashlight I kept near my pillow. I clicked it on and swept the beam across the floor. That was when I saw them. Footprints. Not just one, but a trail of them, circling the room, dark, wet impressions that hadn't been there minutes before. They didn't come from the door. They started at the altar. I turned the light toward the portrait of my grandfather. His picture was still there, but the incense had gone out, the ashes scattered across the floor like they'd been blown from within. My heart pounded so hard, I felt it in my throat. Then directly behind me, I heard the sharp intake of a breath. Close, too close. I spun around, lifting the flashlight, and caught a glimpse of something crouched at the foot of my mother's mattress. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs soaked and trembling as it rocked slowly in place. The skin hung loose from its frame, water dripping from every inch of it onto the floor. Its head was tilted, the face obscured by matted black hair. But I could hear it breathing, slow, intentional, like it had waited a long time to share this room again. The light flickered once and then died. And in the dark, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years, my grandfather's whisper from the shadow. You forgot the offering. Then the footsteps started again. But this time they were all around me. I don't remember screaming, but something must have jolted me, because the next thing I knew, I was outside the house, barefoot, soaked to the bone, running down the narrow path that led to the village. The rain had returned, coming down in sheets, and the muddy trail nearly swallowed my feet with every step. Behind me, the house loomed in the dark, its windows flickering faintly, like something inside was pacing from room to room. I didn't stop until I reached the home of the village elder, banging on his door until he opened it in confusion and alarm. I couldn't speak at first, just pointed back toward the trees and muttered something about footsteps and water. He listened in silence, then nodded. "Your grandfather's spirit," he said quietly. "The altar was not fed. His soul is restless." He brought me inside, gave me dry clothes, and let me sleep on a bamboo mat near the hearth. I woke the next morning with fever and chills, but I was alive. When we returned to the house later that week, the floor was dry. No footprints, no incense, nothing but silence. My mother claimed she had no memory of the night, but every time it rains now, she lights 3 sticks of incense without fail. She never speaks of it, and neither do I. But sometimes, when the storm is heavy, I hear those footsteps again in the hallway, on wet tile. Slow, dripping, waiting. About a month later, after I had recovered and returned to the city, I received a call from a cousin who had gone to clean out the rest of the old house. He sounded shaken. Said something strange had happened. In the storage room beneath the floorboards, he had found a small wooden box wrapped in red cloth. Inside were rotted food offerings, a burned photo of my grandfather, and a note in faded ink. It was written in Vietnamese, but roughly translated it read, "Do not stop feeding him." He remembers the flood. He remembers who left him behind. My cousin didn't understand, but I did. When my grandfather died, a storm had cut off the village. We couldn't reach the house in time for his passing. He had died alone, and for weeks no one came to light the incense to feed the altar to welcome his spirit home. In our family's beliefs, that kind of neglect opens a space for hunger, for bitterness. That night in the house, it wasn't just grief echoing in the walls, it was abandonment. He hadn't come to hurt us. He had come to remind us. And now I carry that reminder in every quiet drip after rain. Because once a spirit learns the sound of your footsteps, it never forgets, especially if it walked alone for too long. To this day, I cannot stand the sound of water dripping onto wood. It takes me back instantly to that night, to the footsteps, the silence, the cold breath of something that had waited too long to be remembered. I now light incense for my grandfather every month, even from afar, whispering small apologies into the smoke. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because I understand now, spirits do not always want revenge. Sometimes they just want to be heard, to be honored. And when we forget them, they find ways to return, not to punish, but to remind us that memory is a thread we're never meant to cut. So if you ever hear footsteps in the dark after a storm, don't ignore them. Someone might be walking back into your life, one slow dripping step at a time. Story 8, Lights Over the Orchard. Back in the summer of 2004, I spent 3 weeks at my cousin Thomas's farm in the outskirts of Mendoza, Argentina. I was 17, restless from city life, and my parents thought fresh air and manual labor would do me good. The farm was surrounded by rows and rows of peach trees, their branches heavy with fruit and their shadows stretching long across the dry earth. The land had been in our family for generations, and Thomas often spoke of it with the kind of reverence most people reserve for churches. It was peaceful there in a way that made you forget the noise of the world. Every evening, we would sit on the porch and watch the sun dip behind the mountains, painting the sky with burnt orange and purple. But there was one thing Tomas warned me about on my first night. Never go into the orchard after dark. I laughed at him, then thinking it was just some local superstition meant to scare kids. He didn't smile. He just looked at me and said, "If you see the lights, do not follow. They are not what they seem." It was the 5th night when I first saw them. I had gone out late to grab a tarp Thomas left near the barn before the wind picked up. The orchard, dimly outlined by moonlight, stretched out before me, calm, silent, unmoving. As I turned back toward the house, something caught my eye between the trees. A faint flickering glow, pale blue, hovering just above the branches. At first, I thought it was a lantern, maybe a reflection off glass or metal. But it moved slowly, drifting between the rows of trees like it had no weight. Then another appeared beside it, then a third. They floated in silence, weaving in and out of the orchard like dancers following an invisible path. I froze, mesmerized. The lights were strangely beautiful, soft and slow, almost inviting. I took one step forward before Thomas's voice cut through the stillness from the porch. "Do not move. Not a word. Not a breath." I turned to see him gripping the wooden railing, eyes wide with something I hadn't seen before, fear. The lights paused. Then, as if realizing they'd been noticed, they vanished. All at once. No sound, no trail, just darkness. Tomas didn't speak as I walked back to the porch. He just opened the door and motioned for me to go inside. That night, he locked every window, drew the curtains tight, and lit 3 candles near the old family altar. I had never seen him like that before, so tense, so focused. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "They only appear to those who are curious," he said. "If you look too long, they start to follow." I asked what they were, and he just shook his head. "Not spirits, not animals. Something older." The next night I stayed inside, but I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to grab a glass of water and glanced out the kitchen window. The orchard was still, but between the trees near the back edge of the property, a single light glowed, soft, steady, watching. I backed away slowly and went to bed without turning off the lamp. The following morning, I found footprints just outside my window, barefoot deep in the dry earth, circling once before vanishing into the rows of peach trees. No one else had been out there, and the soil was too firm for animals to leave prints like that. Something had come close in the night, and it hadn't left a trail, only a sign that it knew exactly where I slept. On the 8th night, I made a mistake. Tomas had gone into town for supplies, and I was alone at the farmhouse. I told myself I would stay inside, but some part of me, maybe the same foolish part that always ignored warnings, could not stop thinking about the lights. Just before midnight, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was unusually still, not even the usual whisper of wind through the trees. I stared into the orchard, and after only a few minutes, the lights appeared again. This time, there were 5 of them, gently swaying above the treetops, like paper lanterns caught in a breeze I could not feel. My heart pounded, but I took a few steps forward, unable to look away. The lights moved deeper into the orchard, drawing me in. I knew I shouldn't follow, but I did. The moment I crossed the first row of trees, the air grew thick and heavy, like I had passed through a curtain of heat. The lights moved faster now, weaving in and out of the rows, leading me further from the house. Then they stopped. All 5 hovered in a circle ahead of me, pulsing softly. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it. In the center of the circle, just above the soil, something hung in the air, twisting slowly. It was me, or something that looked like me. My same clothes, same face, same expression of fear. Its eyes opened, and then all the lights blinked out, plunging me into total darkness. I turned to run, but slammed into something cold and solid. A whisper brushed past my ear in a voice I knew too well. Not yours. Not yet. The orchard was no longer empty, and neither was I. I don't remember running. One moment I was frozen in the dark, heart beating like a drum breath caught in my throat. The next I was stumbling through the rows of trees' branches, tearing at my arms, the taste of iron in my mouth. The lights didn't follow me, but I felt something else did something that moved just out of sight, matching every desperate step I took. I burst through the orchard and collapsed on the porch, covered in dirt and sweat and something else I couldn't name. Tomas found me there at dawn, curled up like a child, eyes wide open. He didn't ask questions. He just helped me inside, made strong tea, and sat across from me in silence. "Now they know your name," he said quietly, not looking at me. For the next 2 days, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the doppelganger suspended in that circle of light. Same face, same fear. On the third night, I left. Tomas didn't stop me. Before I boarded the bus, he handed me a pouch of herbs and said, "Keep the lights behind you." I still don't know what that meant. But sometimes in dreams, or in reflections, I see the orchard again. And I wonder, did I leave it, or did something leave with me? A month after I returned home, I began to notice small changes. My bedroom clock would run backwards for a few seconds in the middle of the night. Mirrors fogged up even without heat. I'd wake up with dirt beneath my fingernails, though I hadn't left the house. At first, I chalked it up to stress or an overactive mind. But then, I got a message from Thomas. It was a single photograph sent to my phone, an image of the orchard at dusk, the lights hovering again between the trees. And at the center of them was a figure. Me. Standing perfectly still, staring back at the camera. Same clothes I wore the night I ran, same expression of confusion. But I wasn't there. I was hundreds of miles away. I called him, demanded an explanation, but the line was filled with static. All I heard before the call dropped was his voice whispering, "It chose you." That night, I dreamed I was back in the orchard. Only this time, I wasn't walking, I was watching. From above, from within the lights. I woke up gasping, heart racing, the scent of peaches heavy in the air. I checked my phone. The photo was gone, and so was Thomas's number. The lights didn't just lure people in, they took something. And sometimes what they leave behind isn't entirely you. I've never returned to Mendoza. I don't call Thomas anymore. I'm not even sure if he's still out there tending the orchard or watching the lights. But every so often I catch glimpses of that soft blue glow reflected in train windows, hovering at the edge of my dreams, pulsing behind my closed eyelids. I've learned to avoid mirrors at night, and I never walk alone near trees after dark. The thing is, I don't know if I escaped or if I was replaced. Some days I wake up and feel off, like I'm still being watched from somewhere far above, or maybe from inside. If you ever see lights moving where they shouldn't, don't follow. Because not everything that beckons wants to be found. Some things want to wear your name, and some orchards never truly let you leave. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.